To say Jujutsu Kaisen is one of the most popular anime of our generation would be a severe understatement, even though it's significantly younger than some of its contemporaries in a genre that's in the most oversaturated state than ever before. Over the span of just a couple of years, JJK rose up from nothing and has now become a household name in Shonen Jump, winning several different awards, and in 2024 was the most talked about show on television alongside One Piece and Young Sheldon. From movies, merch, memes, Jujutsu Kaisen literally held the world in the palm of its hand, which made its eventual decline hurt all the more, since that same year, the manga came to an abrupt end, with a finale so controversial that it made once die-hard fans send death threats to its creator. So then, how did this happen? How did JJK start off as a typical run-of-the-mill shonen to reaching the absolute peaks of the industry to having one of the most universally hated endings we've ever seen for a series? And what prompted its mangaka, Gege Akutami, to end it the way he did? I find Jujutsu Kaisen to be one of, if not the most interesting anime to talk about due to everything revolving around it within the context of the story and pop culture wise as well. And in this video, I aim to answer all these questions and pinpoint what exactly caused its downfall as we talk about JJK from the very beginning to the end. And trust me when I say that the true answer is a lot more interesting than just saying that Gege got bored. Probably. Now I think it's not super controversial to say that Jujutsu Kaisen didn't have the most compelling beginning. Now that's not to say it was straight up boring, but in the ever-changing landscape of manga trying to hook people in as quickly as possible, JJK starts off pretty tame compared to the rest. The story takes place in modern day Japan, but the twist is in that in this universe, there exist curses. Beings that are essentially negative emotions manifested into these grotesque looking creatures. And as a baseline premise, none of this seems too out of the ordinary for a shonen series. Even our main character Itadori really doesn't present anything new or that interesting. Like, wow, you're freakishly strong, super nice, and have emotionally absent parents? Yeah buddy, join the fucking club, dude. At this point, JJK had all the elements it needed to be a run-of-the-mill shonen series that's destined to be forgotten. But the draw of JJK isn't necessarily its generic premise, but more so how it takes the stereotypes of the shonen battle genre and twists them in its own unique and, more specifically, bizarre way. Such as our main character becoming one with the strongest curse in history by eating his fingers. Then said guy who eats fingers enrolls in a jujutsu school by wrestling a doll. And it gives a really interesting edge to the series, which is expanded upon more when we meet some of the other characters, like Nobara. A fresh take on a female lead, where instead of being a stereotypical helpless female with big badonkers, she's a badass who oozes charisma and confidence wherever she goes. But it never comes off as a, wow, she's so cool and awesome and doesn't feel emotions, that a lot of bad female leads end up being, since she isn't afraid of getting in touch with her feminine side and goofs off whenever she feels like it. Alongside her, we get Nanami, Todo, Panda, who's literally called Panda, and a whole bunch of other characters that would stick out like a sore thumb if they were in any other series. But since JJK has established such a strange identity for itself already, they only help distinguish the bizarre world Gege has set up. The only character I'd say that didn't really land for me early on was Megumi, but it's not necessarily because he did something wrong. I'm just not a big fan of the stoic, no-nonsense strong guy in shonen series, as they come off as pretty boring to me. But hey, he has some pretty dope powers and a backstory that seems like it's gonna play a huge role later on. So while he doesn't do much for me now, I can admit that the guy has a lot of what's the word again? Whatever, it'll come to me later, and will slowly become more interesting. But the obvious standout character early on is the super senior himself, Gojo. Gojo is a huge standout when it comes to the mentor figure stereotype in shonen battle series, since instead of having some stern, burly old man who can easily pass off as a gilf, Gojo is more of a DILF. A lot of what makes him so interesting is how highly he's perceived in the eyes of every character. Despite the fact that he's very childish and comes off as more of a comic relief for the most part, as early as chapter 2, he's regarded as the strongest, and someone who even the main villains of the series acknowledge as a massive threat to their plans, which only adds to the mystery and I guess aura surrounding Gojo, and would encourage readers to want to find out more about him and why he's perceived this way. Which, speaking of, even the villains of the series are written in an unconventional way. Usually, a villain needs to be intimidating, fierce, and above all, strong. Think of your Arlongs or your Mashibas, characters that you know will be a threat to the good guys just from their designs alone. So obviously Gege looks at these characteristics and thinks, ah, so that's how it's done. And then gives us a guy whose clothes are way too baggy for their own good, whatever the fuck this is supposed to be, and twink. And I absolutely love them. But not just because of their out there designs, and more so how the villains choose to interact with one another whenever we see them together. For example, they could be plotting their schemes to take over the world and eradicate the human species while playing a friendly game of Mahjong, and these moments do a great job of making the villains seem more human-like and furthering themselves from what's usually normal for a villain to do, since they're partaking in human-like activities, and seeing how they're always butting heads and having friendly banter with one another, it makes you think, huh, maybe these guys are actually pretty chill. Oh no! These guys are not chill at all. Yeah, a big strong point when it comes to how Gege writes is how he lulls fans into a false sense of security. When something good begins to progress and the story looks like it's going in a certain way, he immediately rips it out of your arms and takes the story in a completely separate direction. Exhibit A being Junpei Yoshino, a character who's been an outcast his entire life, who finally makes a friend in Itadori and looks like he's about to join the main cast, gets murdered less than 10 chapters later in the most gruesome way possible. Not to mention, it's at this point we come to understand how despicable curses can be. When we first learned that Itadori permanently lives with Sukuna, I thought, oh, so Itadori's gonna have an overarching plot where he learns to take control of Sukuna by the end of the story. And it's not like there's any kind of foreshadowing that led me to this conclusion. No, I've just seen this exact plot line in so many other series before, so I naturally thought that Itadori would eventually conquer the demon inside him and, you know, maybe learn that Sukuna ain't that bad of a guy along the way. Yeah, no, that gets shot down instantly. As when Itadori begs Sukuna for help in a dire situation, Sukuna not only turns him down, but laughs in his face, forever thinking that he would have sympathy for humans. This entire arc, while very depressing and dark, was needed for both the audience and Itadori to demonstrate the lengths Gege would go to show how horrifying the world of JJK is, and show that Itadori must learn what kind of tragedies these curses can commit if he isn't able to save people. But perhaps where JJK is able to shine best is when it comes to the power system, cursed energy, which I honestly would say is the most eccentric power system that we've ever seen out of a shonen battle manga. But what makes cursed energy super interesting to me is how big of a range there is when it comes to what kind of powers there are. Here you'll have characters fight using the power of speech, teleportation via clapping your hands, or driving your nails on a strongman. Yes, you'll still have your characters who can wield a sword or use generic fire powers, but the methods in which their powers work and the way the characters use their abilities in battle is never one-dimensional. They never win through brute force, and there's usually layers upon layers of reasoning to their wins or losses. Not to mention the fight themselves are flashy as hell. The way Gege depicts attacks makes them look more like a spectacle rather than a brawl, which you know can be a little bit confusing when you read the fights at first, but once you let it marinate a little, you'll be able to understand it. Except when it came to Gojo. God, maybe I'm just stupid, but I was never able to understand how its powers worked. But it still looked really cool. Of course, the fights of Jujutsu Kaisen are what draw people into reading it the most, and is a big reason as to how it became super popular. But personally, what appealed to me more than just the cool punchy stuff was the character chemistry and their interactions. The moments that Gege gives for the characters to just chill out and have fun are some of my favorite moments of JJK, giving the necessary downtime time needed to build the relationships to make it seem more real. Whether it's Itadori and Nobara geeking out over food in Tokyo, or all the students of Jujutsu High playing baseball, there's a plethora of all these slice of life moments where we get to see the characters and their relationships with one another. But my personal favorite is the relationship between Todo and Itadori, or should I say their brothership. Like when the two immediately connect over their love of tall women with voluptuous asses. For a second I was like, this feels a little bit too fast. But then I realized that this is how most guy friendships begin. One time I was doing a project for school with two other people. I noticed one of them had Kirby stickers on his laptop, and I was like, yo, you fuck with Nintendo? And he's like, hell yeah. And boom, he became one of my best friends today. Gege just gets how friendships work. With how hectic the job of a sorcerer can be, given how they're going life and death with otherworldly beings every day, the fact that there's still enough time for the cast to have some slice of life moments makes the relationship seem all the more real, and adds substance to when our characters go on missions or partake in tag team battles. And with this formula Gege has made for himself, you can sort of just tell that the guy is having a lot of fun writing JJK every week. Whether it's in the chapters themselves with some funny character interactions, or after the chapter where Gege shares some fun facts regarding the series and implements some of his own stories to share with the readers. My personal favorite is when Gege recounts the time he was invited to a party for Shonen Jump authors and talks about how nervous he was confronting some of his associates and how much of an awkward guy he can be. It's a pretty wholesome and relatable read, and gives us a chance to develop some kind of connection with Gege, which is something that mangakas typically don't like to do. Yeah, by the way, this was after the chapter that Junpei showed up to school. These grueling and dark moments, contrasted with the slice of life moments, worked, and after a couple dozen chapters, Jujutsu Kaisen amassed a pretty okay following, selling about 600,000 volumes by the end of its first year. All things considered, JJK was off to a pretty great start, if it wasn't for one big problem, which is the fact that it feels like there's been little to no stakes at all. Like from chapter 1 all the way to the end of the Goodwill event arc, it never feels like the characters are in any sort of real danger, and it's all because of the existence of Gojo. Now, I don't mind Gojo. I can see why he's so hyped up, because again, filth. But his mere existence brings forth a big issue whenever an overpowered character is introduced in a battle manga. And that is how any sort of struggle that our characters are up against can never feel real when guys like Gojo can come in and absolutely steamroll everyone. In the hands of a great writer, an overpowered character can be done right, like with All Might and his time limits, or Aang with his inexperience. But in other cases, OP characters have to somehow be nerfed or stall out of a conflict so there can be some sort of tension when they're not around. And Gege tries to do this on multiple occasions, like in the Goodwill arc, and how the villains specifically set up a barrier so Gojo wouldn't interfere with the infiltration, or have him straight up just not be there in the Mahito arc because he's quote unquote on a business trip, so coincidentally these villains that we know can be destroyed by Gojo can somehow be a threat. But I don't know, I think it just feels way too forced here, along with the fact that Itadori physically can't die due to Sukuna's regeneration powers. I never found myself to ever be on the edge of my seat whenever there's a conflict, knowing Gojo can just come in, make you trip hard on LSD, and we'll all be good. So I was able to see the potential of Jujutsu Kaisen and saw why many people were high on it, but I never felt myself being 100% invested in any of the arcs. And you can feel that from Gege as well, as it felt like he knew that everything he was writing up until this point was good, but he knew he could do more. So I was just waiting, patiently waiting for that defining moment where I truly feel that Jujutsu Kaisen was worth all the hype surrounding it and demonstrate what Gege could do if he had all the pieces he needed. And come chapter 79, the incident occurred. There comes a point in a good 10% of shonen battle manga that it finally separates itself from the rest of the pack, and it feels as though everything the author has been setting up since the beginning of the story has all led up to this certain arc. Hunter x Hunter has Chimera Ant, One Piece has Marineford, Bleach has the Soul Society, and Jujutsu Kaisen has the Shibuya Incident. On paper, the Shibuya Incident shouldn't work. It can't work. Realistically, a 58 chapter arc that contains 17 different fights with around 30 characters of relevance would be too much for a single author to handle. There would be way too much going on at once, and it would be so easy for the plot to become an absolute mess. But it isn't, and in fact works so goddamn well that it's unanimously agreed upon to not only be the best arc in Jujutsu Kaisen, but one of the best arcs in recent shonen history. And I believe there was a couple of writing decisions that Gege was able to nail that made this arc so good. And the first of them was having Gojo's past act as a prologue to this one. I'll keep my thoughts relatively brief, but I think that this was a pretty damn good arc, being able to showcase Gege's greatest strengths and mixing comedy and lighthearted slice of life stuff with very dark and gruesome storytelling, along with giving us some much needed information on Gojo and how exactly he became the sorcerer he is today, and giving us the context as to what exactly caused the rift between him and Geto. And this arc really goes out of its way to emphasize how close these two were, and why exactly we should be invested in Geto as a villain, which makes for an amazing setup for what's to come in the Shibuya Incident. Because remember when I was complaining about the non-existent stakes before, and how the existence of Gojo removes a lot of the tension? Well, it's almost as if Gege took that criticism to heart, and was not only able to fix it, but arguably made it seem as if the zero tension was actually on purpose, because here, Geto and the gang's goal is to seal Gojo, and once they're able to do that, in a very smart way mind you, JJK poses the question: what happens if an overpowered character is removed from every and all conflict? And oh god, we definitely see the repercussions of that. Because all of a sudden, those villains that were literally fodder in the hands of Gojo immediately become final boss worthy opponents. After dozens of chapters of characters saying, "Wow Gojo, you're so strong and powerful and hot, what would we ever do without you?" to finally seeing what that would look like is insane. Which at the same time gives us a goal for the characters of Jujutsu High that actually has real emotional weight to it. Since we know how much Gojo means to them as a teacher, as a friend, and a pillar of hope, and now we see them desperately trying to get him back against these absolute freaks of nature. And that's the crux that's able to hold this whole arc together. The fact that there's real emotion to every fight that takes place here. Because, you know, we all like when motherfuckers punch each other. It's awesome. Literally in my top 10 favorite things next to Goldfish and Kung Fu Panda 2. But the best fights always need a valid reason as to why they're punching each other. Because that's what makes a viewer invested and root for one side to win. And I'd argue that JJK struggled to give us that emotion for fights in prior arcs. That's not to say I was always bored, but they just never gave me a good reason to care other than he's the curse and I'm the Jujutsu guy, therefore he must throw hands. But almost every fight in Shibuya is devoid of that. Because of Gojo's imprisonment, I care so much more for all these fights, given what our protagonists are fighting for. And in some cases, Gege is able to give us emotional substance to both sides of the fight, like in Itadori vs Chozo, a fight that has all the qualities I mentioned before, but now has an extra layer to it, and tells a story of someone who knows he's outmatched, trying his best to stall out time for his comrades to get through, and someone who's trying to get revenge on the person who took his brothers away from him. Easily among my favorites in all of JJK. Among the many improvements Gege has exhibited, I feel like he also perfected the pace of this arc, which again is essential for how large this arc is in scale compared to everything else that came before, especially when you watch the anime portion of the Shibuya Incident. The absolute high you get from watching Maki Zenin and Nanami vs Dagon, and then Dagon opens his domain, and then Megumi joins in the fray, and just when all hope seems lost, Toji comes out of nowhere and beats him up, and then Jodo comes in and roasts them all like a marshmallow, while Megumi goes ahead and fights his dad, all in a matter of only 3 episodes! Feels like I'm doing crack for the second time. Feels like I'm glued to my screen at all times. And it never feels like it's way too much at once, since Gege knows when to slow the pace down when it needs to be, especially for the more depressing moments of the arc. Which, Speaking of, in a lot of shonen battle series, no matter how bloody or injured characters come out to be in fights, they will never die. And even though it feels very unrealistic how the mangaka keeps them alive, it's hard not to blame them for this. Death is an end-all be-all, and for every mangaka, the characters they create are sort of like children to them, since they're the people who brought them to this world and let them flourish and be loved in and out of the series. So you can see why it's a tough decision for them to take that character they watched grow and rip them out of it. So when an author actually goes through with it, you just think, damn, I can't believe that, insert mangaka here, actually went through with that. And immediately these people would cross a line that few mangakas are able to pass. And in the Shibuya arc, Gege puts himself past that line, and a number of characters we cared about met a pretty tragic end. Like Nanami, he was awesome and a fan favorite. But damn it, Mekamaru was so close to getting with Miwa! And yeah, it's pretty sad, and it truly shows how being a sorcerer usually means you're not going to be able to live a full life. But usually, that's where it would end. That's where it should end. As a mangaka, you've done your job at taking risks and killing off beloved characters. But Gege seemed to have other plans. To truly illustrate how hopeless our heroes are without Gojo, and how cruel these curses can be, he showed his trump card. Near the tail end of Shibuya, Itadori was facing off against Mahito for seemingly the final time after losing Nanami. We also find out Mahito's clone is squaring off against Nobara. And Mahito does the classic, I will destroy Itadori inside and out and kill his comrade. And like, yeah, right, Nobara is one of the main characters. There's no way Gege would just kill her off like that. And so the fight rages on, and Nobara is actually doing pretty well against Mahito, landing some decent shots of her own, and is actually giving Mahito a lot of trouble. And you start to think, finally, the heroes are getting the upper hand, and eventually it reaches a point where all four combatants are in one room. Okay, interesting, but we're still good. And while Nobara is distracted, Mahito lands a hit on her. And for a moment you think, nah, there's no way that just happened, right? She's fine. She's fine. And then her backstory happens. What? No, what is happening? She starts to reminisce about her friends. Guys, no, we're not doing this right now. She starts to apologize. God, there's no way! I will never believe in a million years that Gege would kill off a character as important as Nobara, as popular as Nobara. She's the female lead. She automatically has plot armor. She is essential to the story, and I refuse to believe that she would actually die. Oh. Nobara is my favorite character in Jujutsu Kaisen. From the moment she first appeared, I knew she was going to be an absolute joy to watch from beginning to the end. So to see my favorite character go out not even halfway through the series and this badly was obviously pretty depressing, but more than anything, I respected how bold Gege was for this decision. Because it's one thing killing off a beloved character, but it's another killing off a main character. And I just gotta applaud Gege for having the gargantuan fucking balls to do something so daring and act so nonchalant about it afterwards. Having an extra after the chapter of comparing himself to a fucking psychologist. This puts himself on a whole other level in terms of brutality he's willing to commit for his stories. On a level I can literally only think of one other mangaka is willing to go, and illustrates a message for each and every reader that, yeah, no one is safe in Jujutsu Kaisen. Even after that, the high notes still continue, with Todo coming in and lifting Itadori's spirits when he's at his lowest, and concluding with an absolutely beautiful fight with Todo and Itadori versus Mahito, which is probably my favorite within the entire series. Capping off the arc with the defeat of one of the three major villains of the story, but suffering many casualties along the way. And wow, what a ride this whole thing has been. It really feels like that during the Shibuya arc is where Gege came into his own as a writer and felt as though this was his magnum opus that truly put Jujutsu Kaisen on the map, and the arc Gege wanted to write the most ever since he started publishing JJK. There were some things I took issue with that will be mentioned later, but my questions that I had before this arc started were answered in flying colors, and now I could truly feel the hype of this series. The arc in the manga was great, the arc in the anime elevated it to a level which is almost unheard of. It increased the scope tenfold and brought so much more attention to the series that the volume sales went from the aforementioned 600,000 to 15 million by the end of the arc. It was a complete and utter masterpiece and success all the way through, and by the end of it, I only had one thing left to say. How the hell do you follow this up? When it comes to JJK discourse online, I find that Shibuya and Shinjuku Showdown to be the most talked about aspects of Jujutsu Kaisen, and sure, it does make a lot of sense given how a lot of the crazy stuff that happens in the series are in those arcs, but I always found it kind of strange how nothing is said about the arcs that happen in between them, so I was pretty interested in finding out why exactly that was when I finally witnessed them for myself. And now that I finished reading through them, I can say, yeah, I can definitely see why. The immediate aftermath of Shibuya consists of Itadori, Megumi, Chozo, for some reason, and a bunch of characters new and old recuperating and planning out their next course of action now that the status quo has dramatically shifted. And this was 100% needed. JJK was at a weird place, all things considered. Many of the plot lines that were set up in the beginning met its conclusion, but there was still a lot of stuff to cover. We still have 2 of the 3 major antagonists to deal with, Itadori's execution is back up, and Gojo being sealed, to name a few. And these arcs were a perfect time to start building on those lingering plot threads so they can naturally get the attention they deserve later on. But Gege says, fuck that, let's go do some Fight Club shit where we go fight the club and have imaginary friends. I never actually watched the movie before. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that I disliked what was happening in these arcs. The introduction of Kashimo was pretty dope, and Maki versus the entire Zenin clan was honestly one of the coolest things to happen in the entire series. But a part of me can't help but feel like this entire segment of JJK feels a little bit like filler. Especially since the end part of Shibuya gave us 5 big plot setups that seemed as though they're going to take center stage in the story moving forward. But they just didn't, and were sort of just shelved for later, or literally didn't amount to anything at all. Like regarding the last 3 points, Masamichi's death was so rushed that it felt like it had no significant value in the overall story. And Itadori's execution, you know, the thing that's been established since the 2nd goddamn chapter of the series, was entirely waved off like it was nothing. Seriously, Yuta comes in, makes the bold claim of, I will kill Itadori Yuji, gets into a little scrap with him, and then says, you're good dude, don't worry. And it just feels so awkwardly placed. With such an interesting plot setup that could have gone in a number of different ways, to just have nothing transpire from it, makes it feel like Gege didn't really know how to follow through with it, and just concluded it here, rather than having some big confrontation between Itadori and the higher-ups who want to kill him, where he can try to prove his innocence. I don't know. To me, it feels like the idea of Itadori getting executed was supposed to be a bigger deal, given how long it was built up for, but Gege didn't really have a plan to conclude it, so he just unceremoniously ended it out of nowhere. And speaking of things that sort of came out of nowhere, Chozo is just kinda chilled now. What? Look, I understand why it happened like this, since there was this whole fake memory thing he had with Itadori, and I do like the idea of a cursed spirit turning a new leaf, but it just happened way too quickly. Like, he literally went from, I must get revenge on the filthy humans who took my brothers away from me, to, oh shit, you're related to me? Oh, cool, okay, we're good then. Like, no, give me that mental anguish, that turmoil of him joining the side that he's always hated, and within these 2 arcs, it was the perfect opportunity to give us the development we wanted, But we didn't get that. And instead, we got a second big brother figure to Itadori, conveniently right after his first big brother figure has seemingly been taken out for the rest of the story. So even though these two arcs had their moments, I wouldn't say it was some of Gege's best work. But you know what? That doesn't matter, because these arcs were clearly meant to be groundwork for what's to come. It introduced many plot lines and characters that will play roles in the future and overall serve as good build-up, so the execution will be all the more sweeter. I mean, we've already seen what Gege's capable of if he's able to perfectly set things up, so we just gotta be patient for him to deliver on each and everything he established here in the Culling Games. A big-ass battle royale containing the best sorcerers in the world, all headlined by one of the overarching antagonists in the series. So we have one of the best battle arc concepts combined with Gege's superb ability to depict fights. So it would already be a shoo-in for a fantastic time. And in the beginning, you really feel it. A bunch of moving factions and tons of battles. It's obvious that Gege is really trying to replicate what made us love the Shibuya arc here. But as everything slowly came together, I start to realize that I wasn't really loving anything that was happening here, and at first it really confused me. We were finally dealing with actual plot relevant stuff, and the fights looked crazier than ever before, yet I found myself slogging through each chapter instead of getting invested in them. And it's strange, on a visual standpoint, these fights haven't lost a beat. But when I take a closer look, I realize that what makes these fights less engaging to watch is not exactly the punch fighting, but who is behind those punch fightings, and specifically how I don't really care about any of the characters that are here. Here, let's take something like Gojo vs Sukuna compared to Kinji vs Kashimo. Two fights of similar length, which don't involve any of our main characters, but one proves to be so much more impactful than the other due to how much more of a connection we have with Jogo and Sukuna. We've seen how they interact with characters outside of battle, what kind of shortcomings they have, certain dreams, their mannerisms, and more. This is more so felt on Jogo's side, given how much more time we had to be with him, but that moment when Sukuna beats Jogo at his own game, and Sukuna, who thinks he's so above everyone, actually acknowledges Jogo as a worthy fighter, was already crazy enough, but this was followed up by Jogo crying, not only from Sukuna's strange nice words, but also from the fact that he knows that he's about to die, which proves that despite his hatred for all things human, he can exhibit one of the most raw emotions a human can feel. And then you compare that to this fight, which again is cool as all hell, has two characters we know next to nothing about, and invokes no real drive for me to get attached to either side. Except for my attachment to gambling! Let's fucking go, Kashimo! Gambling time! In several different fights of the past, Jujutsu Kaisen always prioritized substance over style, but within the Culling Games, it feels like the priority has switched, with most of the cast that plays a role in this arc feeling more like action figures who are primarily known for having a crazy ability than actual characters with, you know, a character who also happens to have a crazy ability. And I'm not saying that every fight needs to have a really big underlying tone that is supposed to change your perspective on life or whatever. Shibuya also had its fair share of fights that weren't super emotionally impactful, but those were concise and in between all the substantial ones, not the majority, which is made all the more worse since the Culling Games is the longest arc in the series, making it feel more and more boring the longer it goes. Not to mention how our main characters kind of just disappeared, which would have been fine if some kind of story or other character could have naturally progressed the plot, but there was nothing. So JJK as a result felt kind of aimless, with an arc that felt like it was getting kind of repetitive. With the constant fights and little to no story in between, the series felt less like an author trying to write a story, and more so like a battle royale video game. Wait a minute, was that fucking foreshadowing? Fans didn't necessarily hate what was going on here, but it was pretty obvious that they were getting tired of it. The plot was moving at a snail's pace, and just when it seemed like the hype was gonna reach an all-time low, chapter 212 happens. Alright, that's a little bit of a lie, since before this chapter, Itadori and Megumi do find a way to unseal Gojo, and Kenjaku fights Chozo and Yuki, which is a whole other can of worms I won't go into now, but this chapter is what really helped Jujutsu Kaisen gain a lot of steam again. and it all starts with Megumi. So up until this point, Megumi's reason for participating in the Culling Games, hell, his entire reason for being a sorcerer in the first place, is to protect his sister. And after dozens of chapters searching for her, he finds her. And you know, as an audience, this is pretty cool. Finally seeing one of the main objectives of the Culling Games complete, and seeing a character that's been built up for ages in the present story feels like we're actually getting some progression again. Oh. Okay then. It turns out, no, actually, Megumi's sister has been dead this entire time, and her body is now being occupied by a 1,000-year-old curse, effectively destroying Megumi now that one of his sole purposes for living is gone. Crazy stuff by Gege, and now we gotta see how exactly he'll recover from this, and what possibly Itadori can do to make his friend feel better. Wait, what the hell is this? No fucking way! For the longest time, Sukuna was like a secret weapon for Gege, someone who kept his true intentions very ambiguous, yet had such a looming presence over the entirety of Jujutsu Kaisen. And for a long time there, as in literally 100 chapters, he didn't really do much, and we didn't know when exactly he was gonna show up again. Only for him to steal the spotlight in what's supposed to be a very emotional chapter for Megumi and end up stealing his body. It all happened so quickly, but due to Gege's tendency to change the status quo on a flip of a dime, it does fit in line for what we were used to in the series. Got any more surprises for us, Gege? Are you sure? One more chance, I mean it. Alright. Cool. So now after these massive plot twists, we gotta take a step back and get a couple of chapters to see how Itadori will deal with getting taken away, not one, but two of his comrades, and what this entails for the rest of the Culling Games. And just like that, Gege was able to rekindle intrigue with 3 massive plot twists and a fight that's been foreshadowed since the beginning. The hype for this series was at an all-time high, and it was quite impressive really, given how not too long ago the series was in kind of a drought, all things considered. And it just goes to show how quickly fans will come back around for a story, as long as you give them what they want to see. But maybe it felt a little too quick? I know I just complained about how things felt too slow, but it seemed as though we skipped a bunch of steps. Just a couple chapters ago, it felt like the Culling Games were far from over, and Kenjaku just started to put his final plans into motion. Not to mention, some of the more miscellaneous plot points, like Miwa's big role in the Culling Games, was sort of just glossed over, with the biggest offender being Megumi and everything revolving around his sister. A plot thread that has had a lot of significance for the majority of the series just tossed aside, and since sounds like it's saying zucchini. Tsukimi is such an irrelevant character. No, seriously, search up her wiki page. There's literally nothing. It's hard to feel any kind of sadness for her or for Megumi because this traumatic experience is glossed over and completely forgotten about within the same chapter we find out. Again, it's almost as if Gege had other plans to flesh out the Culling Games and these plot threads, but due to how long and kinda slow it felt, he opted to just skip ahead to where the tension really picked up. Something that he has exhibited before on a lesser scale, but could, and I say could, ultimately lead to more brash writing decisions. But hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still plenty of time for Gege to naturally conclude those storylines and do those characters justice in the future. I mean, above all else, Gege would never sacrifice his cast for cool fight scenes, right? 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 So far I've had a formulaic structure to this video where I essentially begin an arc talking about the most important moments and why I give them a big yay or nay, what it means to the story, and move on to the next one. But I'm gonna break that formula for a second and talk about something that has become increasingly apparent as we get deeper into the series, and that is how the majority of the side cast sorta become irrelevant. Maybe irrelevant isn't the right word. More like it becomes so fucking obvious that Gege has favorites. I've already stated that it feels as though the new characters that have been introduced since Perfect Preparation have felt more like action figures than real people. But alongside the new guys, it feels like the characters we already came to know and love have significantly gone downhill during the process. Like for example, Geto. Or, I guess, Kenjaku now? I'll just say Geto. In the beginning, all the way up to the end of the Shibuya Incident, he served as a very good villain due to how many mysteries there were surrounding him, and served as a great foil to Gojo. But every time he showed up after Shibuya, my interest for him went down more and more. And it's weird, even though that mysterious aura is now gone, we're finally seeing him put his true plans into motion. But it just never engaged me as much as watching him and his gang try to seal Gojo, and that's when it hit me. The reason why Geto became so stale to me was because his gang was gone. Okay, I'll stop now. Earlier, I talked about how refreshing it was to see the villains having fun and their playful interactions with one another, in contrast to all the death and murder they did. And Geto acted as a great straight man when paired up with the hot-headed Jogo or Mahito and all his twinkiness. But now that all those characters are gone, there's no more of that fun and relatable side to the villains, and the only times we see Geto is when he's fighting or scheming his plans away to men in business suits. In fact, that light-hearted downtime isn't even there for our protagonists anymore. And you know, I understand why. The Shibuya Incident was a turning point for the series, as it fully embraced the darker tone. And with a lot of those characters now gone, it's really hard to go back to the way things used to be, which was even stated by Gege in an interview. And even though I would have still liked for there to be some of these moments here and there, because that was the main draw I got from JJK in the first place, there are bigger issues at hand for our characters. Which doesn't even matter because most of them don't contribute to anything. With the plethora of new combatants, it feels like the majority of characters we've come to know sort of just stand in the background or are completely absent. And oh, don't get me started on what happened to the female cast. First off, we have... Wait a second, hold on. There's a better way to present this. Do you know that very popular Jujutsu Kaisen meme that's like a TikTok edit showing all the female characters in the series with the caption, Jujutsu Kaisen has the best female cast, and all the while this song plays in the background? Shit, wait, I can't just play, I might get copyright striked. All you gotta do is stay a minute, just take your time. Yeah, that one, and in the middle of showing all the girls, Zoro or Squidward jacking off appears out of nowhere. See, the creator of this meme's original intentions were for you to laugh when Zoro shows up because, haha, he always gets lost, or, you know, Squidward jacking off. But the thing is, the actual funny thing about this meme is the fact that all these characters suck ass. Miwa called herself useless as a joke for the entire series and ends up actually being a joke for the entire series, despite the oh so obvious foreshadowing that Gege was gonna make her important, but he doesn't. Mai loved her backstory with Maki, but is really weak and more so just ended up being a plot device. Mei was actually pretty cool, all things considered. Nope, we are not doing that again. Yuki seemed like she was gonna play a major role after being reintroduced into the story, but instead she lays back with Chozo to protect the Tengen, and then die while sacrificing her life to damage Geto, which could have been a defining moment for her character if it wasn't for the fact that her black hole attack did nothing, rendering her sacrifice to be completely pointless when it was so easy for it not to be. Nobara didn't have a ton of shining moments, but her death was really good, so it kinda counts. The only female character, and one of the only characters for that matter, to reach their full potential would be Maki. Someone who was never gifted any cursed energy, but never saw that as a weakness, was pretty inspiring. And seeing her go on to take revenge for her clan and compete with some of the top tiers later on served as great character progression from where she first started. Damn, who would have thought one haircut can change that much? Damn it, never mind, it didn't work. Anyways, I feel like Gege screwed himself over by making the JJK cast as big as it is, and I can't really blame him for that. When it comes to a long-running shonen, a large cast of characters usually comes with it, so naturally it becomes harder for writers to create cohesive storylines for everyone. But man, at least give us something! One Piece has over 1,000 named characters, and I kid you not, I can tell you more about what these fucking Kung Fu turtles are up to in the modern day story compared to any of the students of Kyoto High. And I feel like it really stems from the fact that when a character fulfilled its purpose and Gege does not know what to do with them anymore, he sort of just wipes their existence off the face of the earth. Like after Toto makes his final stand with Mahito and loses his hand, that's it. That's the last we see of him. We get no updates on what his condition is. Even Itadori, someone who he was very close with, never asks how or where he is. And funnily enough, this is more than I can say compared to the other students. And if Gege doesn't have any use for these characters anymore, then so be it. But man, give us something to work with at least. A cover page of him in the hospital, or a little blurb from a character mentioning his condition. Just give us something to remind us that these are real characters with lives at the end of the day. But no, instead the majority of these characters contribute less than the guy who's been trapped inside of a cube for over half the series. And you know, it just kinda sucks. Knowing how cool and unique all these characters were when they were first introduced, and all the possibilities that could have been done with this ensemble cast, only for them to be replaced later on or completely forgotten about without a second thought. Hey, I mean, even with all that, JJK still has a better cast than Persona 5. As early as the 3rd chapter of the series, this hypothetical was brought up by Itadori. Who would win in a fight, Gojo or Sukuna? And from what we've seen up until that point, there's a good chance that the majority of the audience have also thought of that question as well. I mean, these are characters that have already proclaimed to be the strongest sorcerers in history, so it's hard not to be a little bit interested. And since that moment, Gege made it his utmost priority to hype up this hypothetical fight in any way he can, showing that in terms of speed, power, IQ, and more, that these two characters are miles above everyone else. And even those who are known for being very powerful stand absolutely no chance compared to them. And slowly the question stopped being, will Gojo and Sukuna fight? And started to become, when will Gojo and Sukuna fight? And it's almost as if Gege edged his entire audience, having these two be sealed away so the fans would never know when he wanted to bust this fight out in front of us. And after 129 chapters, 1,183 days in the climax of the Coloring Games, and right when we least expected it, Sukuna takes over Megumi's body and Gojo is unsealed. And with no more limitations, we would finally get to see these two titans clash. And even though all this is insane, it feels like it was way too much at once. I mean, just a couple chapters ago, it felt like we were still in the middle of the Culling Games. So it feels necessary to have a little bit of a breather before the final fight begins. And Gege, being the talented writer he is, recognizes that and decides to put the fight on hold so Gojo and the rest of the sorcerers can recuperate and can catch him up to speed as to what's happened ever since he's been sealed, and overall have a little bit more time for these characters to chill and interact with each other before we hit the climax. Is what I would say if I was a fucking nerd! We're skipping right ahead to the day of the fight. I mean, does Gojo even know what's happening in the world right now? Or that one of his precious first-year students died a gruesome death? I don't know, but who fucking cares? We're finally gonna see Gojo vs Sukuna, and that's all we need! Alright, on a real note for a second, this is such a weird move by Gege. Like, if he didn't want to have a month in between Gojo being unsealed and the fight, he could have just not done it. Even though some downtime was needed, we could have just unsealed Gojo and have the fight start right after. But it's the fact that he presented the idea, had people go on board with it, and then immediately went back on it right after. We couldn't have had like one chapter for the sorcerers to welcome Gojo back and seen them train for the fight, or at least an extra story about it? It just feels so jarring for a series that previously relished in these fun one-off side quests or entire chapters dedicated to training the students. And the fanbase unanimously agreed that they would have liked to see something of this manner before the fight began. But we didn't. Almost as if Gege was afraid of showing something that wasn't purely action. But okay, putting all that aside, here we are. Chapter 223, Gojo vs Sukuna, or as the narrator puts it, the strongest sorcerer in history versus the strongest sorcerer of today. Arguably one of, if not the most anticipated fight in manga history. And I think it's kind of overrated. Where the fuck are you supposed to be? Oh! On an artistic and creative standpoint, this fight is a masterpiece. Gojo's elegant and flashy attacks, mixed in with Sukuna's bloody and gruesome techniques, makes for such a spectacle. And some of the panel spreads look so goddamn good. You can tell that Gege didn't hold anything back in showing why everyone was so hyped up for this fight. They even had every sorcerer come together to watch everything go down, almost as if it was some crazy UFC fight, which was really fun to cut back to at first. Again, I say at first, because this commentary from the side cast just keeps showing up and ruins the pace of the fight. And like, I get why this commentary is here. JJK has a very complex power system, so some explanation is needed, but it just ruins the flow of the fight, and even then, most of what these characters are saying can be boiled down to the worst so back chart. And if you think I'm overselling it, I decided to do a little experiment where I looked at every chapter of the fight and analyzed what parts of the fight they were actually fighting, and what parts of it were the play-by-play commentary. And after meticulously going page by page and closely looking at every panel and dictating what counted as a fight and what didn't, the result showed that, wow, no fucking wonder I don't have a girlfriend. If you think I'm being too nitpicky in this regard, I understand, but for a fight that I've been looking forward to reading, I just wish it wasn't bogged down by the constant cuts. But it didn't really matter anyway because Gojo got no diffed. Look, we all knew the outcome of this fight before it officially came out. Even if you weren't keeping up with JJK, it sure as hell felt like you were, because this fight and its ending was all over everywhere. Tweets after reels after posts. It was literally impossible to escape this fight, and how much of a stranglehold it had on the internet. And I guess that just goes to show how great of a job Gege did in building it up, but it is kind of fortunate that I and many other people who didn't even read JJK got spoiled on what the outcome of the fight ended up being. Not to mention that this conclusion is straight up awful as well. Now, a part of me understands why Gege did this. The chapter before builds up a ton of hope that Gojo's going to win, only to pull the rug and immediately crush that hope in an instant. But for a fight that was built up for so long with two extremely popular manga characters, one of which finally came back after being gone for over 3 years, I think he deserved a little more than just getting off screen. And not only that, apparently Sukuna didn't even go full power. Like, really? 6 years of build-up and all of this from Gojo just for it to be a low diff makes me like the fight even less in retrospect. Like, you can have Gojo die but cause severe harm to Sukuna, showing that he didn't come out of it unscathed, and so it would be more plausible for the rest of the protagonists to have more of a fighting chance against him. But since that's not the case, Gege has made it really hard for anyone to believe that Sukuna can be beaten if the supposed strongest sorcerer of today barely made a dent in him. Just a couple of word changes could have made this criticism non-existent, but with the way it is now, I would go as far as to say that Gojo vs Sukuna did not deliver. At least when it comes to the context within the series. Because during that time period from chapter 223 all the way to chapter 236, something changed within the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbase. As more and more people started to tune in, to the point where even non-JJK fans started to keep up, Gojo vs Sukuna wasn't just a fight anymore, and slowly started to become an unforgettable moment in internet history. This event absolutely broke the internet into something that has genuinely never been seen before in any sort of anime. You know what? In any sort of piece of media in general, causing Jujutsu Kaisen's reputation to never be the same ever again. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Lobotomy Kaisen. No, I'm actually serious here. This will be important for the video. Let me start off by saying that the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom is one of the most talented manga fandoms out there. There is so much high quality fan art, fan animations, cosplay, you name it, that truly show how passionate people are about the series. Like, look at this fan animation of Gojo vs Sukuna. This shit is awesome. But then you also have stuff like this. And I don't even know where to begin with this. If we go back to that conversation in chapter 3, after Itadori asks the fated question, Gojo responds in the most nonchalant and chill way possible, saying, "Nah, I'd win." And as we flash forward all these years later, in chapter 221, Gojo is asked the same question again. And in response, Gojo, of course, says, "No." Which, like, okay, still gets the same idea across, but given how well the words, "Nah, I'd win," fits Gojo's playful personality, it was a little unfortunate to not see him make a callback to something he said before. But a lot of fans took a big issue with this, and wanted to do something about it. But, you know, most of the time, nothing would really happen. You know, maybe a hashtag on Twitter would gain some traction, or at most a petition that the creators would never see. But this time, it actually worked. The outcry for this moment caused such a big uproar that the Viz translators went ahead and changed Gojo's line to officially be, "Nah, I'd win." Which on one hand is pretty cool that people were able to create so much fanfare that it reached the higher ups and made them oblige. But it also goes to show how many fans this series had and how dedicated they were at that, as they were able to stir up so much controversy for literally only 3 words. So then the question came up. If Jujutsu Kaisen fans can cause all of this to happen, then what else are they capable of? From then on, the fight got underway. Gojo and Sukuna were knocking each other up, and of course, people were talking about it online. A lot. I mean, there's always gonna be a lot of discourse online for a major fight in any series, but it was almost unprecedented how many people were tuning in, especially for a fight that didn't even include the main character. Fans of both characters going at it week after week, Twitter users were turning into doctors overnight, and memes, like a whole bunch of them, started to spawn every chapter. And amidst all of this, season 2 of JJK premiered, an impeccable adaptation that was covering 2 of the most beloved arcs in this series that both also spawned their own subgenre of memes, meaning even more eyeballs were on JJK. And just when it seemed like the series couldn't get much higher, it happened. Chapter 236 happened. And whatever semblance of normalcy the fandom was trying to keep together at that point was utterly destroyed. Whether you loved or hated this decision, it truly changed what the series was forever. As after this death happened, we officially entered the era of Lobotomy Kaisen. Edits were made of different characters in different series in Gojo's death pose. Real life funerals were held for Gojo. The "Nah, I'd win" line was completely recontextualized now that Gojo pulled a Skylander swap force, which then prompted other famous panels of this series to be memed to oblivion as well. Eventually, big companies started to play along with all the JJK memes, making their own renditions, and even the anime got roped into this whole thing as well. The most depressing and heartbreaking moments of the series were made into complete jokes in mere hours, because at that point, it was the only way the fandom knew how to cope with what was happening. And what exactly did Gege do to lessen all this discourse? Nothing! In fact, he actually tried to make it even worse! As right after Gojo got Kit-Katted, the audience and the cast were only given 3 pages to let it sink in before the fight continued as Kashimo appeared, only for him to fucking die 2 chapters later. Gege gave his audience literally 0 downtime to soak anything in. Chapters had a huge tendency to introduce an insane revelation, have the audience think, "What the fuck is this?" And then Gege ends the chapter and goes on break, which only prompts the fandom to make their own lobotomy. And when the next chapter comes out 14 days later, Gege barely gives an explanation as to what happened previously, but everyone's already over it anyway since Gege just introduced something even crazier. Rinse and repeat for months on end. And people loathed him for this, actively saying that he hates all of his characters and his fan base and is such a huge troll for always leaving us on these cliffhangers, which would then only inspire the JJK fandom to make even weirder stuff, like Kashimo becoming the god of fanboys, Waffle Shima, Bush Camper Yuta, Pukuna. Like Pukuna? But perhaps the most well-known and biggest victim to come out of this whole thing is this image of Jogo enacting the moment that kickstarted Lobotomy Kaisen in the first place, more commonly known as Jogoat. And while you may see this and just think, haha, funny volcano guy, when I see this, my very sanity falls apart. While the other memes are sort of explainable, this one seemingly has none. Yet it absolutely dwarfs the others in terms of popularity. Like, how do you think of this? Why is it drawn in such great detail? Who named it? How did it get so popular? Why does it exist? And while I can't find an answer to those questions, what I can say is that Jogoat sort of just embodies what the mental state of the JJK fanbase has become at this point. The unpredictability of the series seeped into the minds of the fans, which brought forth things that didn't necessarily make sense, but are here to make people laugh, and more importantly, to cope with the circumstances of what was happening in the story. And this just goes to show how much of a stranglehold this series had on the internet and meme culture from chapter 223 onward. In fact, it was so popular that at one point, the main leaker of the series was the 5th biggest account on Twitter, above celebrities like Mr. Beast, Andrew Tate, and oh, you know, the fucking President of the United States. And this wasn't some user affiliated with Gege or Shueisha. No, this was some random guy who posted JJK content like 2 days before the official chapter came out, yet millions upon millions of people want to see them as soon as they possibly could. And the reason why I bring all of this up is that Lobotomy Kaisen really was such a weird amalgamation as to what the story eventually devolved into. Because the moment Sukuna vs. Gojo started, JJK didn't really feel like a story anymore. Everything the series had going for it in the beginning didn't matter anymore, and every character that we've come to know only served the purpose to fight. And with no time to relax in the story, this also meant the fandom couldn't relax either. And it's important for a series, even an action-heavy one, to have those moments where stuff is slow for the characters and the audience can just take a breather for a change. But Gege had no plans of doing that. And that is completely evident of how he decided to handle the aftermath of Gojo's death. And with the loss of the most popular character in the series, right after we got him back, fans had to find other ways to cope with the insane events that were happening every chapter. And for a long time, it worked. Seeing how most of the fandom are power scalers, it seems they were content with the bizarre cycle Gege and they created. So at a cultural and funny standpoint, Shinjuku Showdown was pretty great. But if you took away all the funny stuff and purely look from a storytelling perspective, you'll quickly realize that, wow, Shinjuku Showdown kinda sucks ass. Now that the Battle of the Strongest has come to an end, we should now get some focus on some other plot lines and characters, right? Like, isn't it time we finally deal with Gojo, you know, the main villain of the series? Well, funny story about that. No, seriously, that's what happened. He turned to a funny story about that. The final confrontation with Kanjaku boils down to a comedy routine with them and the character of Takaba before getting slashed by Yuta. And I don't really know what came over Gege here. Maybe he wanted to lighten up the mood after Gojo died, or maybe he just wanted to draw a fight that wasn't just punches, but this whole thing has me really conflicted on how I should feel about it. Because on one hand, it's really fun, and is a great example of what makes JJK's power system stand out amongst its competitors. But like it or not, Gojo is the main villain of JJK, who's been built up before the series ever started, as the main puppet master for every big conflict in the series, for his big climactic ending to be reduced to some buddy cop slapstick, then sucker punched, feels incredibly cheap. Even though my overall interest for Gojo diminished once he lost his gang, I still felt way more invested in their character because of how long we've been with them and how much of a presence they had in the overarching story. And after all of that, they were just taken care of as if it was just some side quest while Sukuna steals the spotlight. Man, at least have him defeated by an important character. Like, half Bald Guy is cool, don't get me wrong, but the fact that he was only introduced an arc prior and didn't even have much of a presence there, yet he contributes more to the story than 95% 95% of the main cast is wild to me. And then Gerojaku proceeds to say, "My will shall be carried on," which, fun fact, it doesn't. Feels so unbaked and unsatisfying. Again, it's almost as if Gege had some interesting ideas to conclude Kenjaku's storyline, but rushed everything about it so he could get back to the Sukuna gauntlet, which as far as that goes is also pretty hit or miss for me. On paper, I love the idea for everyone to band together for one final onslaught to take down the King of Curses, but in practice, I got very tired of it almost immediately. Because ever since Gojo became Go and Joe, the fight with Sukuna essentially boiled down to fighter comes in, goes Jujutsu Kaisen mode on Sukuna, Sukuna then defeats or kills them, and then another fighter comes in to take their place, and we start the process all over again. Sometimes there are multiple people jumping him at once, which sort of spices things up, but even then, never once did I feel the fight was really going anywhere because of how impossibly OP Gege made Sukuna. Insanely OP villains are a big double-edged sword when it comes to a battle manga. At first, they're able to pull you in with their otherworldly strength and cause a lot of intrigue so readers would think, wow, so-and-so is so strong. How is our protagonist gonna ever be able to beat that? And their unsurmountable power would continue to be displayed until the author would inevitably write themselves into a corner because they simply made them too strong, and would now have to find some Deus Ex Machina or simply nerf them because there's literally no feasible way to beat them otherwise. Sometimes a really good author can make it work, like how in Chainsaw Man— whoa, hold on. Wait. So in my last video, I got a good 1 or 2 comments telling me it was an asshole move to spoil Attack on Titan and any other series I talked about without giving any fair warning. And to that I gotta say, yeah, fair point. That was definitely my bad. So moving forward, I'll try to give a clear warning if I ever talk about anything spoiler heavy, like I'm about to do now. So if you don't want any of that for Chainsaw Man, just skip ahead. Like how in Chainsaw Man, where Makima was built up to be an unstoppable and unkillable force of nature, and instead of trying to beat her by brute force, Denji had to find a loophole, a way to take her greatest strengths and turn them into weaknesses, and use that to catch her at the best possible moment. And continuing on to finishing her off for good in an unconventional yet very Denji-like way. Or Meruem, where they just threw a blanket at him. And Gege looked at these possible waves of taking down an OP antagonist and said, huh, interesting. Fuck that! And then he did the complete opposite. I already talked about how frustrating it was to see Gojo get beat fairly easily by Sukuna, but the fact that afterwards he goes on to fight Kashimo, Higurama, Itadori, Yuta, Maki, Chozo, and take all these hits, and Gege still has the audacity to say that he still isn't going full power, is incredibly stupid to me. I feel like he got lost in the sauce after building up Sukuna for so long. He really wanted to show how much of a menace he was, which costed the story in the long run. Again, Sukuna can kill Gojo, that's fine, but have him take a serious amount of damage to have the gauntlet actually seem winnable and make Gojo's death not feel as worthless. I mean, he's already done this before when Nobara was able to deal a large blow to Mahito, and she was a big factor as to why Itadori was able to beat him in the end. And it's not like this made Mahito seem weaker or less threatening. In fact, it only meant the opposite, as it means it took the combined efforts of multiple characters to even have a chance of taking him down. But here, these 2 simple lines from this arc cause such reprehensible damage to the pacing of the gauntlet and the characters themselves. For what's to be the climactic final showdown of the series has made me feel nothing more than pure anger at how each chapter has felt repetitive, but also devoid of what made the series so engaging in the first place. And it came to the point where I lost all hope for Shinjuku Showdown and Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole, until I read chapter 259, where Gege was able to pull me right back in when I least expected it, and it all started with this guy. Now, you already know that I was a little put off by Chozo when he decided to randomly join the good side after the events of Shibuya. But throughout all this time, he started to grow on me a lot more. Chozo is driven by his unwavering desire to protect his family, and when he learns that Itadori is related to him, he doesn't hesitate to do what he can to help him. after a little bit of a mental breakdown. And given what little options he had at the time due to everyone he's lost, he begrudgingly accepts Chozo, and from there, we see a bond form between them, which eventually led to Chozo befriending the other sorcerers and even going as far as to protect the Tengen from Kenjaku's eventual attack. To see someone who had such a distaste for humans when he was first introduced to arguably becoming the most human out of the entire cast and sacrificing his life for Itadori worked as a fantastic conclusion to his character. And what's to follow made this moment even more impactful. As with everyone gone, it means that Itadori's worst nightmares have finally been realized. As someone who really values his connections with other people and whose sole desire is to die surrounded by people he loves, to now be the person who survives while everyone else is dead is so utterly tragic. And that is felt as he looks around on the battlefield and just says, "Is anyone?" Only to be met with the thing that took everyone away from him. The saga of Chozo and chapter 259 in general is something reminiscent of what Gege was so good at when he wrote JJK in the earlier parts of the story. The one that lets the story breathe in between all the punching and absolute chaos so two characters can share a conversation and have a character death actually mean something again. But unfortunately, that version of Jujutsu Kaisen no longer exists. Because not even 2 fucking pages later, Gege pulls us somehow he returned and Todo comes back from the depths of hell. Okay, no, Todo was never actually confirmed to be dead, but at this point, I kind of just accepted the fact that he would no longer serve any purpose in the story. I mean, Gege has given us 0 updates ever since he woogied his last boogie. As much as I hated that we couldn't get 1 update, it seemed as though Todo has fulfilled his purpose, so eventually, I was fine with it. I enjoyed Todo for what he contributed to the story, and I was fine with it if he never showed up again. But here, of all places, Gege decides to bring him back with no reasonable explanation. But I think what pisses me off more than anything else is that this is clearly meant to be a callback to when Todo first appeared during the Shibuya Incident, but it's so utterly devoid of what made that moment so impactful in the first place. When Nobara first got hit in chapter 124, we proceed to get an entire chapter dedicated to her and her life before her unfortunate demise by the end of the chapter, which is then followed up in chapter 126 with Itadori's mental breakdown and Mihito's onslaught before the very end of the chapter where Todo makes his grand appearance. All these moments naturally flowed into each other, making the situation bleaker and bleaker as time goes on, but only helped to make Todo's entrance feel all the more satisfying, since at no point did anything feel rushed, which is in part to what makes these 3 chapters one of, if not the greatest stretch of chapters within the entire series. And it would be completely lost if, per se, Nobara died, Itadori had a mental breakdown, and then Todo showed up all in the same chapter. Which, oh, look at that! That's exactly what happened here. It just really feels like that now more than ever, Gege looks at these characters as nothing more than game pieces that he picks up and plays with for a couple of seconds before getting bored and throwing them away. And we, the fans, are at the mercy of his pen to find out if they'll show up again or not. And the specific way that Gege decides to bring him back rubs so much salt in the wound, totally undermining the amazing conclusion to Chozo's character and have Itadori get over his death now that Todo's back, and seemingly confirms my suspicions that Chozo's entire existence was only meant to fill the big brother void that Todo left all the way back in Shibuya. I mean, I find it really coincidental that Chozo became a main character right when Todo was removed from the story, and now that he's back, Gege thought, shit, these guys played the exact same role, so then he killed off Chozo to make room for Todo. Hell, the way the relationships even started with Itadori in the first place are extremely similar, which makes me think less of both of these character dynamics if they're essentially just playing hot potato with Itadori. At this point, it's almost as if Gege made it his mission to try and make a bigger plot twist every chapter or so, and each time it splits the fan base in terms if they like it or not, and for me personally, I just became desensitized to it. Like Yuta taking over Gojo's body or Itadori's domain house tour were theoretically cool, but due to to how rushed it is and how those moments just lead us back to where we were before, made them less impactful, to the point where I sort of just expected some crazy plot twist to happen, because that's the only thing Gege felt like writing at this point. Like, oh, what's next? Megumi domain expands inside of Sukuna to escape. Yuta comes back into the fight again, now using the top half of Gojo and the bottom half of Nanami. Nobara's gonna come back to life. Oh, come the fuck on! Yeah, okay, cool, awesome. Nobara's just back. She's just here, alive, after 142 chapters, and absolutely zero mention of her being alive in that time frame. Nobara just comes back to the story. And don't try to tell me that her death was never officially confirmed. Like, I don't care if there was that one blonde guy who told Itadori that there was a tiny chance she would survive. It was basically said in chapter 144 that she was gone. And fans had no reason to believe otherwise other than to cope, which I guess ended up working. Nobara's death embodied the harsh reality of being a sorcerer and was such a big turning point for the series. It's what made Itadori adopt the Kage Machine mentality and how even the ones closest to him can be taken away in a heartbeat. It went such a long way in furthering the plot and the context in the story, and out of it as well, as this proved the lengths Gege was willing to go to enhance the experience of the story. But now, all of that is gone. Everything I said about Gege breaking boundaries and having gargantuan balls are gone. His balls are now gone, because of how he took back one of the best writing decisions that I've ever seen for a shonen series, just for a cheap plot twist, which retroactively ruins one of the best moments in the entire story and completely undermines one of the biggest themes of Jujutsu Kaisen. Just let the teenage girl die. Afterwards, Itadori finally used his actual domain expansion, main character powers, and defeats Sukuna once and for all, thus bringing the fight to an end, the gauntlet to an end, and Jujutsu Kaisen to almost an end. I mean, even though the fight's over, we gotta have a decently sized epilogue to explain all the unsolved mysteries that Gege has obviously been waiting to explain. So these next couple of chapters, while very short, should be able to give fans enough closure to a ton of plot threads that they were waiting to see more of. Which is exactly why the first thing we see out of this epilogue is a super casual and fun mission where the first years have to catch a wacky cursed user for this married couple. The end. Wait, what about the merger? The end! Wait, or how about Itadori being Kajaku's son? The end! Are we not gonna mention how Nobara survived? The goddamn fucking end! Story's over, the book is done, everyone go home now. Chapter 270 and 271 feels like one of the biggest betrayals Gege could have given us. And it's not like Oshinoko's ending where it goes against everything the story builds up, but this one just feels so out of place. Since barely 2 chapters ago, we were in a high stakes level fight with action, plot twist, you name it, and then immediately shifting over to a goofy Monster of the Week story not only has such a big difference in tone, but also gives fans nothing of what they asked for. Given how many plot points Gege built up, the fact that many of them are either rushed to all hell or isn't even addressed feels like we left the story at a place that doesn't feel conclusive at all. Reading that last couple of pages felt like a cliffhanger to the next arc and not the end-all be-all, leaving fans really unsatisfied due to how many plot threads they were promised to get answered eventually, only for them to never be brought up again. And funnily enough, the characters are handled even more poorly somehow, with most of them barely getting any sort of substance by the end, especially our main characters. Sukuna, apart from how much aura he has, literally encompasses one of my biggest problems with the latter half of JJK, which is flash over substance. In the beginning parts when he would show up, do something insane, then leave, it worked because it was in such small bursts and it helped build intrigue to when he'll get the spotlight later on. But when he finally got the focus, it became so much more boring because being strong was literally all he had going for him. If we got some sort of backstory or scenes of him doing something that doesn't pertain to fighting, it could have helped humanize him a bit more. But instead, this lack of necessary build-up for Sukuna has made me look at him and this entire gauntlet as a whole as not really like a battle in a story, but more so like a final boss in Elden Ring, even though the bosses have better characterization than him. Probably, I don't know, I haven't played Elden Ring before.
I stated that way earlier on that I wasn't the biggest fan of Megami when he was first introduced, and those feelings only got worse as the story went on. Even though he's a pretty sympathetic character, his reasoning for being a sorcerer held him back from ever growing, since everything he did was never for himself. Aside from his cool powers, fighting for his sister was such a shallow reason, and Gege didn't make much of an attempt to further him from just that. And even strength level wise, it feels like he stagnated throughout the entire story. Despite the fact that the two strongest characters wouldn't shut up about it, Megami would barely fight, and when he did, it was against some nobody or he would lose by a wide margin. Which was very disappointing considering this guy is supposed to be the second main character of JJK, but the worst part about all of it is that it could have been so much more. The foundation was there. After he learns about the fate of his sister, his story could have went in so many directions. Revenge, grief, emptiness. The death of his sister opened up so many possibilities for becoming a more well-developed character. And when it seemed like we were finally getting some substantial focus on the guy, Sukuna swoops in, comes in his body, and Alice Shazam, Megami is no longer relevant for the rest of the story. It just seems so odd. None of what was set up in the beginning materializes, and by the time Megami does get his body back, the events of chapter 211 have long passed, and we're left with such a nothing burger of a character, leaving him to forever be known as a character with qualities or abilities that could have been developed to lead to a future of success or usefulness. Man, I wish there was a better word for that. Nobara! God, does she even count? Nobara is an interesting case in that her death is what makes her a good character, an asset in the story, as I've already gone in depth about before. But if you take her death away from her, she doesn't really have anything left. She didn't really have any significant character growth. Nothing was known about her until a backstory was spurred onto us in the last second. Hell, she's never even won a fight before on her own. But all of this would have been fine and arguably makes sense if her fate did end in chapter 126. But it doesn't. And what we're left with instead is what I would say is the worst fake out death I've ever seen in a manga. Specifically because it was never supposed to be a faked out death. Gege literally confirmed in an interview that he planned for Nobara to die in Shibuya long before it happened. So then why did he change his mind? Well, since I already said my piece on Gojo earlier, I pretty much covered everything regarding the story and the major players of it, right? There's absolutely zero thing I'm forgetting, right? Nothing at all, right? Okay, cool, we're good now. So let's move on to... Fuck it, fine. I guess I can talk about... As you've probably noticed by now, I have talked very little about the main goddamn character in the series, and there's a good reason for that. It's because I hate him. Hold on, don't get your dicks in a twist yet. It's not because I find him repulsive or annoying, it's because I find it so incredibly difficult to make out what Gege was trying to do with his character. In the beginning, I already mentioned that Itadori personality-wise wasn't anything out of the norm. He's super nice, outgoing, fun, he just comes off as an above-average teenage guy. And while it was nothing to write home about in chapter 1, just like everything else in JJK, Gege uses that trope to make him stand out as a main character. Your typical MC would have a special gift or something to give them a leg up compared to everyone in the series, like a prophecy they're destined to fulfill, a strong lineage, or just simply having a traumatic backstory. And while all these different factors are what makes a main character have depth, it can get tiresome seeing the same tropes played over and over again. But Itadori is truly just a regular teenager who goes to a regular school who has regular friends. And the only reason why he gets roped into the world of sorcerers is not because Sukuna chose him or whatever. He simply made one brash decision that made him have no other option than to throw his previous life away and embrace this new one. But perhaps the most interesting way Itadori embraces this average guy identity are his goals, arguably the most important part of a shonen MC. A good 95% of the time, these dreams feel larger than life. Become the greatest hero, become the wizard king, become the harem king, something that feels so massive in scale that entices the viewer to go along on this journey with our guy or gal and witness them rise from the bottom all the way to the top of the world. And so in Itadori's case, his larger than life goal is to help people.
yeah, that's pretty much it. He just wants to give someone a hand. And again, with how Itadori has been set up so far, this does feel pretty in line with his character. But full disclosure, I hated the fact that this was his dream. And I'm not just saying that because, shonen protagonists need to have some huge desire that ends with them having to defeat God. No, of course not. In fact, there's a couple MCs I can think of that conceptually have pretty down-to-earth desires but still work in making an engaging story due to how relatable they are. And they eventually have to defeat God along the way. But the point is that these can work. But what worried me about Itadori's goal was how there was never a clear sign of progression with it. With something so broad, it's going to be hard to gauge how close or far Itadori is to completing his goal. Not to mention how he thought up this dream in the first place was pretty flat, with his grandpa showing up saying, "You're pretty strong, Itadori, go help people, my dude." And then dying felt really forced, but that's neither here or there. So where else are we supposed to go now? What can Gege possibly do with that dream to make it interesting for the viewer to continue watching the story from Itadori's perspective? And to my surprise, Gege actually makes it work. With such a simple dream, instead of making Itadori constantly work towards it, he challenges it and gives the guy unique scenarios as to why helping people isn't as easy when you're a sorcerer. With a fearsome womb arc asking him what would you do if helping people meant throwing your life away, or in the Verse Mojito arc where he helps and befriends someone, only for that to blow up in his face and have him suffer because of it. These moments give way to what Itadori desires, and shows how even if he tries his best, the life of a sorcerer makes it so much harder to carry out a small dream. But of course, as with most things in the series, this comes to a full stop in the Shibuya Incident arc, where Sukuna takes over his body and has these massive fights with Jogo and Maharaga that destroy the entirety of the city. And when all is said and done, Sukuna leaves Itadori to witness the catastrophe that he caused, and he has an utter breakdown at what just happened. As someone whose primary goal is to help people because he has the power to do so, the fact that his body was the cause of so much destruction tears him up on the inside. Even though it technically wasn't him, you can understand why this utterly destroys him. And it's a good moment to show how Gege can take such a simple motivation and turn it on its head to almost make it effective. Notice how I said almost. Because even though Sukuna did a lot of damage and killed a lot of people, all of them are just faceless nobodies, casualties that we had no clue as to who they were, and an arc that didn't care about killing innocent bystanders. And no, I'm not saying we need to have some elaborate backstory about everyone Sukuna killed, just any kind of substance would make this moment hit a lot harder. Like how in AOT, Eren got to connect with some of the Marlians before the rumbling, or how in Hunter x Hunter, we had a good chunk of time dedicated to learning about Kurt, Reina, and their mother, and how close they were as a family before the kids got shanked by the crab. Like, even though in the grand scheme of things, these are small pieces in a bigger conflict, these events feel all the more tragic, since the mangaka took the time to let us connect with the victims before their untimely death. And the Shibuya tragedy, at least the shit that Sukuna caused, is missing that emotional aspect, when I feel like it could have easily been fitted in somewhere. We could have had an arc somewhere in between the Goodwill events and Gojo's past, where a smaller scale threat was terrorizing the city, in which the students of Kyoto High, and throw in the students of Tokyo I guess since they're pretty worthless, had to take it down, which could highlight Itadori as some kind of hero of Shibuya and let him connect with the people he saved, not only giving more meaning to why Itadori wants to help people, but also making it all the more soul-crushing for him and the audience, knowing he would be the reason why all these people he originally saved would unfortunately meet their end. Even if Gege didn't want to go through all that trouble, the opportunity was still there with Yoko. You know, the one girl who appeared, had a crush on Itadori, and said he helped her. It could have been so easy to slip in the casual line of, "Oh, ever since I moved to Shibuya, I missed Itadori more and more." She could have served as a great plot device for Itadori, realizing the first person he's ever helped ended up dying by his hands. And given Gege's ruthless track record and the fact that Yoko never contributed anything to the story ever again, this seems like the type of thing that would be right up his alley. Just kill off the teenage girl, come on! But okay, despite my criticisms, Gege found a plausible way for Itadori's dream to work in a main character setting. But now I wonder,
what else can he do? It feels as though he's kind of exhausted all the interesting ways for Itadori to help people and how it can go wrong. And it seemed as though Gege agrees, because after this moment, he didn't have any other ideas either. From the execution arc onwards, Itadori adapts a cog in the machine mentality, and how as a sorcerer, his only purpose is to endlessly eradicate curses for the higher-ups before he runs his course and would be replaced. And okay, this could be interesting. After everything Itadori has gone through, it makes sense for him to adapt a harsher mindset about his current life, and now has a better understanding at where he stands in the grand scheme of things. Cool! How will Gege build upon this? Maybe now he'll be challenged on that mentality, and he'll try to break free from it. Oh, never mind. He just kind of says it a couple times and doesn't really do anything about it. Cool! At this point in the story, it becomes abundantly clear that Gege doesn't really know what to do with his character anymore, as it feels like he ran out of ideas for interesting conflicts that challenges Itadori's ideals, and now he's sort of just going with the flow, which, if you don't believe me, just take it from Gege himself. He specifically stated that he kind of hates his own main character because of how hard it is to write interesting plot lines for him, and as a result, he sort of becomes a side character in his own show, just going along with whatever the story needs him to be at, and having a very reactionary role as opposed to his actionary role he had at the beginning, which as a result makes him feel very irrelevant. Like I said, Itadori was just gone for 32 chapters and I barely noticed it. Typically, if a protagonist is gone for that long, you're signing a death wish, because a story needs a protagonist to function, and this is exactly what I was worried about in the beginning, because now Jujutsu Kaisen felt aimless. Even though story-related stuff was happening, I never truly felt like we were working towards an endpoint. Something that I admire about One Piece is, even though Oda has constructed such a large and expansive world with so many moving parts, he still makes an effort to have Luffy constantly say that he's going to become the Pirate King, which, you know, is mostly used as a gag, but can also serve as a reminder that there is a clear direction and purpose the story of One Piece is trying to tell, and every chapter that passes, even if he isn't in it, we still distinctively know that Luffy, and to an extension us, are closer to reaching that goal than we were from before. But Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't make me feel that way. With no overarching motivation for a main character to constantly work towards, I often felt lost because I never sensed any sort of progression. And without that factor, it causes a ripple and affects the rest of the series, as it was at this point a lot of the characters felt like they were stagnating, the story felt non-existent, and Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole left a lot to be desired. Maybe you could say this was bound to happen eventually. With zero large-scale ambition, there was no possible way for it to work in a long-term story. And I probably would have agreed with you if it wasn't for the fact that there's another main character out there that not only exhibits the same small-scale desires and conflicts that Itadori goes through, but is also handled in a much better way. And of course, I'm talking about more Chainsaw Man spoilers incoming, Denji. When you really think about it, Denji and Itadori go through a lot of the same events in their respective stories. They're both teenagers with fairly minuscule goals that derive from their unusual upbringing, roped into a dangerous world when a tiny decision they both made led to them being the center of a humanity-defining conflict, adapting to all new surroundings, and gaining relationships they long their entire lives, thus achieving their goals, only for them to lose absolutely everything as it slowly gets ripped from them as the story goes on. But where they start to differ is how both Itadori and Denji react to their lives constantly changing. For instance, when Itadori fulfills his grandfather's wishes and has a great support base around him, he grows complacent. And this isn't a bad thing. He can live the life he always wanted. But Denji takes it a different way. Once he fulfills his dream of having basic living conditions and copping a feel, Jesus Christ, Chainsaw Man, you make it so hard sometimes, he doesn't feel fulfilled and still desires more in his life. And as the story continues on, he strives for new goals, bigger goals, and as weird as they might be, it's able to help Denji grow and continue to be a great center of the story, because even though Denji is a reactive main character, he tries to see how any conflict or situation he's in can be used for his benefit, and how it can get him closer to achieving his goals. And this is expanded upon even more when the family he's longed for his entire life dies right in front of his eyes. Again, in a very similar way to what happened to Itadori's loved ones, and even though they both go through some very depressive episodes, how they get back up and continue on dictates their staying power as a main character. And while Itadori suffers and doesn't really change or evolve because of it, Denji continues getting back up and strives to get back what he's lost and gain more, since as he puts it himself, he is a perpetual motion machine, which does wonders if you're a main character. And yeah, Fujimoto wasn't a bitch and actually kept his characters dead. So in conclusion, what I would say as a person, I think Itadori is pretty cool and watch War Man 3 with him any day of the week. As someone who's supposed to be the focus of a long-term story, I find him to be incredibly underwhelming. Not just because of how his character was handled by the end of the story, but also because of how interesting Gege was able to make him earlier on, and how he got me invested in his character after his introduction was so unnoteworthy. And I guess I could say the exact same thing about the entirety of Jujutsu Kaisen itself. A story that was able to take the stereotypes of its oversaturated genre and turn it into something unique that could have staked its claim with the all-time best shonens, yet couldn't. Which made every fan wonder, what caused this to happen to JJK? Or more specifically, what caused this to happen to Gege Akutami? I find the parasocial relationships between a mangaka and their fans to be really interesting, as depending on what kind of series their manga is and the quality of it, you see the fans treat the creator in many ways. Sometimes they view them like a distant friend or view them as a literal god, and others would rather not associate with them at all for various super illegal reasons. But when it comes to Gege and his fan base, it feels like his followers kinda despise him, but not because of the super illegal reasons, but more so how the guy comes off as a massive troll, evident by what he did to fan favorite characters and the insane cliffhangers he would drop before sending the fans to purgatory for 2 weeks until the next chapter came out. I mean, just look at his avatar. Instead of getting something super innocent or cute looking, we get this one-eyed cat with this devious grin as if he enjoys breaking the hearts of every Gojo fan out there. And while that notion is somewhat reflected in his past comments, I don't believe that the guy comes off as completely heartless on purpose. And instead, the truth behind certain Rain decisions are a lot more depressing than you might think. So let's back up for a second and talk about Gege and his early days. Before creating JJK, Gege Akutami made his way into the industry as an assistant for a manga called Kiss X Sis, and with that in, he was able to publish some of his own one-shots for Shonen Jump. He made 4 in total, and they all highlighted Gege's love for battle manga and shows respect to the work that inspired him in the past, such as Bleach and Evangelion. While all these one-shots were received pretty well, it wasn't until he made Tokyo Metropolitan Cursed Technical School that Gege really started to get some recognition from Shueisha, to the point where they wanted to greenlit Tokyo Metropolitan Cursed Technical School into a full series, which really surprised him since he had no desire in making it into a full series. But after talking to his editor, Gege came around to the idea, and boom, Tokyo Metropolitan Cursed Tech. Fuck, I'm not saying that again. Jujutsu Kaisen was born. And you might be thinking right now, that's it? That doesn't seem that hard. And you're 100% right, because unlike a good 95% of other mangakas, Gege had it pretty easy, all things considered. But that's not to say he was given everything on a silver platter. He still worked a ton to make his dreams come to fruition. But when I compare his career to someone like Horikoshi, who over the span of 7 years made countless one-shots that garnered no recognition before finally getting a manga of his serialized in Jump, only for it to get axed twice, made him reach a breaking point in which he thought he'll never make manga again, only for him to give it one more shot with My Hero and finally struck gold. Seems a lot more harrowing and climactic than Gege being told, yo, this shit is fire, make more of it. Now, after getting the news that JJK was becoming a full series, Shonen Jump didn't waste any time to having it come out on a weekly basis, giving him a good 6 months or so before it officially began. And again, Gege didn't have any plans on making JJK into a full series, so I imagined he might have panicked a little to get it done on time. And that notion is reflected in those first handful of chapters, which again are not bad by any means, but were riddled with tropes seen in other popular shonen manga, which made people
not interested in it right from the get-go, which almost resulted in JJK getting axed early on since it failed to bring any intrigue, which prompted Gege to make the bold decision of killing off Itadori. And even though it was kind of obvious he wouldn't actually die, this off-the-cuff decision by Gege sorta acted as a catalyst for how he would write Jujutsu Kaisen moving forward, seeing how this plot twist is what saved the series from getting axed, but also created this kind of unique darker aura around JJK that gave people more of an incentive to read it, and from this reception, Gege finally had something going for JJK and tried to expand on this certain aspect as he continued to write chapters moving forward, expanding the world of JJK, but at the same time subverting our expectations on what a shonen series is supposed to be until we reach the Shibuya Incident, a war arc that seems so utterly one-sided after Gojo gets sealed, that kills off a ton of fan favorite characters and leaves every other one critically injured or mentally scarred. It was absolutely brutal, but highlighted what made JJK stand out among the rest of the light-hearted uplifting shonens that were serialized at the time, which was definitely reflected in the sales numbers. Alongside the climax of the Shibuya Incident, JJK received its own anime adaptation, which couldn't have come out at a better time, given how Demon Slayer helped pave the way for anime to become more mainstream in the modern age, a big quarantine boost because no one was doing anything else anyway, a 24 episode season which is really hard to come by nowadays, topped off with it being produced by MAPPA, a very well-known studio who gave JJK one of the best anime adaptations we've ever seen for a shonen manga. With all these factors combined, it's no wonder JJK gained the momentum it did, going from 2.5 million sales in 2019 to 100 million in its final year. Just to give you a comparison, last year, Hajime no Ippo also hit 100 million sales. Hajime no Ippo began in 1989. It took almost 40 years to get to that number, while JJK only took 5, and even then, most of those sales happened in its last 3 years. To have your first series not only avoid getting axed, but receiving this kind of popularity worldwide is something that has never happened before in manga history, at least to this scale. And it just goes to show how talented of a mangaka Gege was to be recognized for his ability to make a damn good story. And as amazing as this was for someone like Gege, who, again, practically had zero experience before this, I feel like the overwhelming success of the series proved to be very detrimental in the long run. Gege has gone on record in the past saying he didn't want to write JJK for a significantly long time, saying in 2021 that he only intended to keep the series going for about 1 to 2 years. And, you know, it made a lot of sense. Due to the oncoming circumstances to how it even became serialized in the first place, it was likely that now that Gege has become big enough, he can easily serialize another manga to Shonen Jump on name recognition alone. But at the same time, that was logistically impossible. JJK has just finished up its longest arc, and the status quo has completely shifted, and so now the story has to go about setting up the next major arc and develop the plot threads that he set up. And given the circumstances the story was in, there was no possible way for Gege to conclude everything in a satisfying way if he only had 1 year left to do so. And he even acknowledged so in the interview. But that was fine. As long as he took the necessary steps to do so, he wouldn't overshoot his original goal by that much. So he continued to write, and when the next year came, Gege still expressed his desire to wrap up JJK fairly soon. Only this time, the story was nowhere near its completion. Gege was still in the midst of writing the Culling games, and at this point, JJK felt like it was even farther from concluding than it was last year, given how many characters and world building he's given to the series within that time frame. Not to mention how the fans started to get a little restless at this point, with a lot of criticism regarding this arc's pacing and not focusing on what fans really wanted to see. But the thing was, this kind of situation is by no means a rare case for a manga. Mangakas are notoriously known for overestimating when exactly they think their series is gonna end. Just look at Oda. The guy said he originally wanted to finish One Piece in 5 years. He's now said that statement 10 different times, and at this point, the series still feels like it could easily go on for another 7. And there's been dozens of times where fans start to get agitated due to how long an arc tends to drag out. But when you've been writing for as long as Oda has, those criticisms don't really get to you, because in the end, you know what's best for your story. But for Gege, that's a little different. He doesn't have the decades of experience Oda has or the feeling of failure Horikoshi has been through to know what the best path for him is to take. So what does he do now? Does he keep writing at his own pace and keep doing what he wants to do? Or does he give the fans what they want? And I'm pretty sure we both know what path he decided to take. Within the next couple of chapters, the story would go through some massive developments in the blink of an eye. A decision which was met with a lot of praise, and the hype for the series was shot through the roof, but greatly altered how Gege approached writing the series from that point on. Every chapter felt like it was action first, talk later. Something of absolute importance had to happen every chapter, because if something didn't, it would mean one chapter longer than the deadline Gege wanted to get done by. Which brings us to Gege's final Jump Festa message in December of 2023, stating once and for all that JJK should be finishing up next year for real this time, and that he hopes to please everyone when it ends. And fans questioned whether this was really the case, since despite Gege's efforts to rush out the story as fast as he could, there was still a lot of stuff to cover that would clearly need more time. But there was no going back at this point. Gege wanted to finish JJK, and he was willing to do what it takes to finish his series in 2024, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. Everyone is already aware about the grueling schedule of a mangaka, and of course Gege is no exception, as these harsh conditions start to really get to him through the halfway point of the series, as breaks became more and more frequent, and you'd have a couple of chapters here and there that would straight up be unfinished. But that's not what I'm referring to here, as even though these are horrible working conditions, other mangaka go through similar struggles, yet their stories would never show any dips in quality. What I'm actually talking about is how it's become increasingly apparent that Gege was no longer having fun anymore. Earlier on, I talked about how obvious it was that Gege was having a blast writing JJK week to week, and while it may have been a strange thing to point out, the bits and pieces of his personality we'd see from the context within and out of the series was a contributing factor to what made the fans enjoy what he was creating. Because if the author is clearly having fun, then the audience would be as well. But as the series continued on, Gege stopped sharing his small life experiences, the fun one-off chapters became few and far between, and his comments regarding the story have become basic and kinda cynical. And while this series itself stayed fairly consistent when it came to the art and fight choreography, it didn't really feel like Gege was writing JJK because he loved doing so, and instead was writing JJK so he could meet a deadline. Now I fully understand that you could think I'm reaching hard right now, because how could I possibly know that everything I'm saying is true? And you're right. I'm not Gege, and Gege probably isn't me, so I shouldn't say that he succumbed to the grueling pressure and stopped having fun with his series. And I would never be saying all this in the first place if it didn't come directly from Gege himself. Upon the release of the final Jujutsu Kaisen volume in December of 2024, Gege left one final message to leave his fans with, which isn't uncommon by any means, as most mangaka would typically leave a little blurb in their final chapter thanking everyone for reading their story. But in Gege's case, his farewell was anything but that. He started off by calling himself an idiot, and goes into extreme detail about how his mind deteriorated over the 7 years JJK was being serialized, reflecting on how his immaturity as a mangaka left him without feeling any conviction for his story, and how absent-minded he's become with each passing volume. And Gege is no stranger to self-deprecating humor, but here, given how raw every line feels, and with the absence of his stupid cat avatar, everything he says truly feels like his pure, unadulterated emotions
he's been bottling up this entire time.
Jujutsu Kaisen's popularity eclipsed Gege's wildest dreams, so I can see why he put so much pressure on himself to make a story that lived up to the insane expectations that was put on him. And by the end, he feels like he didn't live up to any of it. Here, he's not thanking everyone for reading his story, but apologizing to himself, his editors, and his fans. Because as an artist, the worst feeling in the world is failing, and feeling like you let everyone down in the process. And trust me when I say, that feeling sucks. It really fucking sucks.
Earlier this year, I created a deep dive on Oshi no Ko, an anime that I absolutely loved that fell by the wayside, and that video did extremely goddamn well. Not even just performance-wise, from the comments to posts on other social media platforms. Hell, my parents finally started to give a shit about my YouTube channel. To say that video was one of the greatest accomplishments of my life would be an understatement. And I only have you guys to thank for giving it a chance. And by the end of it, a certain question popped into my mind. How on earth do I top that? That video took the better part of 4 months to make, and I always try to make sure that every video I put out is of higher quality than the last. So, what can I possibly make next to surpass what I've just done? Well, actually, that was pretty easy. Jujutsu Kaisen was a series I always want to talk about, and it was just your standard shonen series. So not only did I feel like I could do it justice, but I was definitely sure that I would have an easier time and wouldn't take so long to make it. However, things were a lot different now. Around that time, not only was I starting a new job and would be going to summer school, but I also would be going on a vacation in the middle of it. So my free time was stretched very thin, but I knew I could definitely manage it. And as little as 1 week after my Oshi no Ko video, I began the first draft of this one. Reading the entire series and finding old interviews and YouTube videos was pretty fun at first. But as I delved more and more into the rabbit hole, I started to realize that JJK was a lot more expansive than I originally thought. Like, sure, I knew about Lobotomy Kaisen, but the extent of it was so much more deep than I originally thought, and there would be times I would sit and dig through it for hours trying to make sense of it all, which is when I started to realize that I didn't know this series at all. And well, of course I didn't. I mean, prior till now, I didn't keep up to it week to week. Like, sure, when it was ongoing, I would see posts about it, but nothing about it really captivated me until I gave it a proper read through myself. And while the panic settled in, it occurred to me that it's now been a month since I started working on this video, and I still haven't finished the script yet. What followed after was a constant cycle of me failing to live up to my own goals, as everything took so much longer than I thought it would. For reference, that whole bit earlier of me cutting off my beard and hair because of Maki, I recorded that on June 20th. Most people I know probably forgot I had a beard at this point. The continuous deadlines I put on myself were never met. At first I thought I could finish it sometime in July. Alright, well, I should be done with it before I go on my vacation. Okay, well, at the very least, I should be completely done by the time we hit the 1-year anniversary of its ending. Damn it! All the momentum and confidence I gained slowly dwindled as I became more unsure of where this video was headed. Do my points even make sense? Am I just stupid? Is this an exact copy of my last video? And anxiety for my videos isn't anything new to me. But now there was a larger problem that started to get to me. And that was the expectations of it all. As when my friends, family, you guys asked about when the next video is coming out, I couldn't really give them a solid answer. And here we are now, over 6 months since my last video, and I feel like I failed everyone. And if someone who in the grand scheme of things who isn't even that big on YouTube was having these kind of thoughts, imagine thinking like this for several years as you write an ongoing story for millions of rabid fans on a work schedule that was inhuman. And when I put it like that, yeah, it's no wonder that Gege ended up feeling like this. After everything he's been through, how could you not? Long-term projects can suck the ever-loving soul out of you. And after all that he's gone through, it only makes sense why he wanted to finish it as quickly as possible and never touch it again. And that was supposed to be the ending of the video. An unfortunate but good reminder about how much a series can change from the first chapter, and how writing a long-term series can break a mangaka in more ways than one. And all that was left was to hope that whatever Gege does next will turn out significantly better for him. And also that I'm an insecure little bitch and should probably just hire an editor. But in between that time frame, something happened that no one saw coming. What the fuck is a modulo? Nearly a year after JJK finished serialization, a new JJK spin-off was announced in issue 40 of Weekly Shonen Jump. Well, technically it was leaked by Miramura, but let's just skip over that. And it's not just a light novel that aims to profit off the success of JJK. No, it's a fully illustrated spin-off that takes place 67 years after the original, all helmed by Gege Akutame himself. Albeit, he isn't the one drawing it, and is only planned to last about 3 volumes or so. But that doesn't really matter. The fact that after everything, the grueling schedule, the insane fans, Lobotomy Kaisen, and just how much this series took a toll on him physically and mentally, that he could still rise above everything and give fans more content is nothing short of incredible. And up until this point, I think Modulo is super enjoyable. It perfectly captures the essence of early JJK with fun characters and unique action set pieces, wrapped around with some dark and unsettling imagery. Not to mention the anime has been doing a superb job with the adaptation so far. Even though I'm not a huge fan of what happens after Shibuya, you'd have to be seriously lame to not be looking forward to season 3. Like, come on, how do you look at that trailer and not feel anything? I'd like to hope that MAPPA can rectify some of the low points, but for the average JJK fan, I feel like they'll be more than enough satisfied. Despite the depressing final message we were left with at the tail end of 2024, not even a year later, and the future looks so much brighter for the series and for Gege himself. If you look at some of the messages he's been posting online, he seems to be doing a lot better than he was before. And that's awesome. If he was able to come back after all the hardships he's endured because of his love for JJK, I don't see why I couldn't overcome my insecurities or the wave of expectations if it meant that I would be able to do what I loved by the end of it, which is entertaining people with my videos. I'm not going to sit here and act like I was the biggest fan of Jujutsu Kaisen, because I'm not. And quite frankly, after 7 months, I'd really rather be doing anything else than think about this goddamn series. But I can say that I am a fan of Gege Akutame. From his likable personality, his crazy art, and just most of all, how he carries himself as an artist. And with that being said, I will for sure be tuning into whatever he has next. Which, speaking of, seems like he has a pretty good idea of what that'll be. Let's check it out. Wait. No. Not again. No. No, you can't do this to me. Not again. No. 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 No! Hey, was that worth the 7th month wait? I goddamn hope it was. This video did really stress me out for a long time, just constantly wondering if I could do this entire series justice, but by the end, I think I did a good job. As always, if you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps out what I do, and you really don't understand how much it means to me to see that subscriber count go up even by a little. So with that being said, thanks again for watching, have yourself a good day, and give this video some hype, I guess, because that's a thing now.